Look, I'm going to tell you about something that just popped up on my radar, and honestly, it's got me thinking way harder than I expected. We're talking about a potential move that could completely reshape how we view the Dodgers heading into 2026, and most people aren't even discussing it yet. Stay with me, because this gets really interesting when you dig into the details. So here's the situation. The Dodgers are coming off back-to-back World Series championships, which is absolutely incredible. But if you've been paying attention, you know they've got some interesting pieces in that outfield that don't exactly fit together perfectly. It works, obviously, because they won it all. But T here is always room to optimize, right? We've been hearing Kyle Tucker's name thrown around as the big prize in free agency. Cody Bellinger keeps coming up as a solid plan B, which makes sense given his history with the organization. But T here is a new name that's emerged, and I think it deserves way more attention than it's getting. Byron Buxton of the Minnesota Twins. Now, before you tune out thinking this is just another random trade rumor, let me explain why this actually makes a ton of sense on paper. Buxton is currently in the middle of a 7-year, $100 million deal with Minnesota. Here is where it gets interesting, though. There are only 3 years left on that contract at roughly $45 million total. That means you are looking at about $15 million per year, which in today's market is absolutely nothing for a player of his caliber. There are some performance incentives built in, so if he finishes in the top 10 for around $23, $5 million. But the base guarantee is $15 million annually for 3 years. Think about what that means financially. You are not shelling out $400 million for Kyle Tucker. You are not taking on some massive long-term commitment. You are getting a controlled cost for 3 seasons with a guy who, when healthy, is an absolute monster. Buxton just turned 32, so he's still firmly in his prime. 2-time All-Star, Gold Glove winner, Silver Slugger, legitimate center fielder, 11 years of big league experience. And here's the kicker. He just came off a career year in 2025. We're talking 35 home runs, which was a career high. 83 RBIs, 24 stolen bases, 21 doubles. Hit .2, 6.4. Those are legitimately elite numbers. Now you are probably thinking this sounds too good to be true, and you are right to be skeptical. There are definitely some complications here. First off, Buxton has a full no-trade clause. That means even if the Dodgers and Twins agree on a deal, Buxton himself has to sign off on it. Now, you'd think coming to Los Angeles to compete for championships would be an easy sell, especially considering where Minnesota is right now. The Twins are in full rebuild mode. They traded away roughly a third of their roster at the deadline last year, changed managers, completely blew the whole thing up. It's basically a 3-year rebuilding project at minimum. So if you are Byron Buxton sitting there at 32 years old with 3 years left on your deal, do you really want to waste those years on a rebuilding team? Or do you want to go compete for rings? On the surface, it seems like a no-brainer. The Dodgers could offer him exactly what he probably wants at this stage of his career. You could plug him into center field. Immediately, Andy Pages moves to his more natural right field position. Teoscar Hernandez shifts over to left. Suddenly, you've got an incredibly sound defensive outfield with serious offensive firepower. We're potentially talking about an outfield that could combine for 90 home runs. That's absurd when you actually think about it. The Dodgers and Twins have already done business recently. They traded James Outman to Minnesota and got back pitcher Bob Stewart, who unfortunately got hurt right away and didn't factor into the championship run. But that existing relationship could make negotiations easier. The question becomes, what would it actually cost to get Buxton? Here is where things get complicated, and this is the part that really concerns me. In Buxton's 11-year career, he's only played more than 100 games in a season 3 times in 11 years. Last year, he played 126 games, which was the most he played since 2017. The guy is unbelievably talented, but he cannot stay healthy. Last season alone, he dealt with a rib cage issue, got hit on the hand, ran into Carlos Correa, and got a concussion. Some of it's bad luck, sure. But T, here is a pattern here that you can't ignore. This is where my hesitation comes in. When Buxton is on the field, he's everything you could want. Elite defense, power, speed, contact ability. But how often is he actually going to be available? The old saying goes that the best ability is availability, and that's Buxton's biggest question mark. Do you trade significant assets for a guy who's proven over more than a decade that he struggles to stay in the lineup? From Minnesota's perspective, they're in a seller's market situation. They've got a player under contract for 3 more years at a team. Nano rate, they know exactly what their budget constraints are. When he's healthy, he's a legitimate star. That means they can demand serious value in return. They're not just going to give him away. We're talking major prospects, at minimum possibly even major league ready talent. Some people have speculated they might want Andy Pages included in any deal, and it definitely wouldn't be a straight swath. The Twins aren't desperate to move him right now either. His contract isn't an albatross. They're not trying to dump salary. If they trade him, it's because someone makes them an offer they can't refuse. That puts all the leverage in Minnesota's hands. For the Dodgers, that's a tough position to negotiate from, especially when you are talking about a player with significant injury concerns. Here is another angle to consider here too. Maybe this isn't a winter trade at all. Maybe it's something that makes more sense at the deadline. By July, you've got a clearer picture of where both teams stand. If the Twins are completely out of contention and Buxton is healthy and producing, suddenly his trade value is even higher, but you also have more information about whether his body is holding up. For the Dodgers, you might be able to assess your needs more accurately by mid-season and determine if Buxton is the missing piece you need for a October run. The financial aspect keeps coming back into play because it really is compelling. In an era where teams are handing out contracts that make your head spin, getting 3 years of potential all-star production, $45 million, is remarkable value. That's the kind of efficiency that helps you stay competitive long-term while still having flexibility to make other moves. But you have to weigh that against the very real possibility that you are paying $15 million for a guy who only gives you 80 games instead of 140. Here is also the question of what it would mean for the current roster construction. Andy Pages is young and still developing. He hit 27 home runs last year, though he absolutely struggled in the postseason, going 4-4 -51 with a .078 average. But that catch he made in Game 7 of the World Series over Kike Hernandez to save the season, that alone probably buys him another year in the organization. His ceiling is still incredibly high. Do you trade that potential for Buxton's proven track record despite the injury concerns? The comparison to other available options is interesting too. Kyle Tucker is going to command a massive contract, probably in the $350 minus $400 million range over multiple years. You are paying for certainty and youth there. Cody Bellinger represents a middle ground, a guy the organization knows intimately who's shown he can still produce at a high level. Buxton is the high-risk, high-reward option. If he stays healthy for 3 years, you've pulled off an absolute heist. If he spends half those seasons on the injured list, you've traded away valuable assets for limited production. What makes this particularly intriguing is that Buxton hasn't publicly demanded a trade. But reading between the lines, sitting on a gutted Twins roster going through a multi-year rebuild probably isn't where a 32-year-old wants to spend the prime of his career. That no-trade clause gives him control over his destination. If he decides he wants out and the Dodgers are his preferred landing spot, that simplifies things considerably. But it also means he could veto any trade proposal if the fit doesn't feel right to him. The Dodgers' front office is notoriously thorough in their evaluation process. You can bet they're doing deep dives on Buxton's injury history, talking to doctors, analyzing his movement patterns, trying to determine if T hears reason to believe he can stay healthier going forward. Maybe their medical team sees something that makes them more confident. Maybe they have concerns that would make them walk away. These are the conversations happening behind closed doors that we'll never hear about, but that ultimately determine Permai.